this morning's online Bible study. Whether you're tuning in at Twitter or Periscope at Bible Study Cam, whether you're on Facebook.com/reflective Bible study, whether you're on YouTube at The Online Preacher, or even at the onlinepreacher.com/live, wherever you happen to be tuning in, whether it's one of those places or somewhere else, whether this is on live as I'm talking or on replay, I want to welcome you to this morning's online Bible study. And this morning, we're going to be focusing in on a little passage and challenge that Jesus gives, along with a promise, on the night that he is betrayed and arrested. And this passage and promise is found in the Gospel of John, and this happens following the Last Supper, the special supper Jesus shared with his disciples, but before they reach the garden where Jesus would be praying and then ultimately betrayed and arrested. And in the several chapters that John dedicates to what Jesus shared on this night, we find an amazing promise. And this promise actually happens right at the very beginning of this conversation. So let's read this passage and discover what we can learn. This is John chapter 15. We're going to start in verse 12 and we're going to read from the New American Standard Bible. Verse 12, Jesus says to his disciples, "This is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you slaves, for the slave does not know what his master is doing. But I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and appointed you that you would go and bear fruit, and that your fruit would remain, so that whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he may give it to you. This I command you, that you love one another." Now this is an amazing passage and an amazing challenge, and one that it seems as though Christians have not lived up to all that well. There's been several times in the scope of history in the last 2,000 years that Christianity has modeled this amazingly well. But at least if you look out at the media's portrayal of Christianity and the majority of a secular person's impression of Christianity, love is not the defining characteristic. And while I believe that the majority of Christians actually do follow and model this, it's unfortunate that the stereotype that we've been branded with, you could say, is not at all like this, or not like this at all. But it's interesting because in this promise and this definition, as well as this challenge, we have an interesting wordplay. In verse 16, Jesus shares, "You did not choose me, but I chose you." Now, when we think about friends and friendship, generally friendship is something that happens once, like it's a mutual thing. Two people have to want to be friends with each other for there to really be a friendship. However, slavery is different. Slavery would be one person choosing someone else, one person potentially buying somebody else. And so Jesus saying, hey, I didn't choose you, or you didn't choose me, I should say, but I chose you. That's speaking a little bit more along the lines of slaves. But Jesus, in this passage, draws the focus and the attention onto, it may have started out as like a servant or a disciple or things of that would display hierarchy. It might start there. But Jesus elevates his followers, his disciples here, to the status of friend, to the status, you could say, of equal, even if equal in this specific case isn't possible. We're not equal with Jesus, even though we have been elevated to be siblings, brothers. We've been adopted into God's family. But Jesus defines what it means to be his friend as well. Verse 14, "You are my friends if you do what I command you. Now, this is a very countercultural and a very unpopular message because in other parts of the Bible, and specifically in Paul's writings, he emphasizes faith and not works as the way we are saved. We are saved by our faith. But according to Jesus, in order to be his friend, we have to do what he commands us to do. And in the context of this passage, the command is to love one another. It sounds simple on the surface, but it's actually really difficult. And if we're uncertain exactly what love means or what the nuances of it is, verse 13, greater love has no one than this, than one lays down his life for his friends. And guess who modeled that for us? Jesus did. Jesus says, hey, I'm going to tell you love is the key defining command, the defining thing that will, or that should, you could say, identify my followers, that I would want to identify my followers. And it's not a casual, shallow love. It is love that is defined by being willing and, in some cases, actually doing, laying down one's life for their friends. And just in case you think that Jesus wasn't willing to model that extreme of a love for his friends, he did. He laid down his life for his friends. Now it's interesting because in this passage, in this challenge that Jesus shares, we have Jesus saying who he's dying for, his friends, and Jesus defining how we are able to be his friends, and that's if you do what I command you, and Jesus telling us what his command is, which is that you love one another just as I have loved you. That's verse 12. We have the complete salvation picture, but in a way that is not at all pleasant to think about. Because we would love salvation, you could say maybe to be cheapened by just simply saying, I believe in Jesus. I believe Jesus existed. And does that mean I get to go to heaven? Well, that might be one little sliver of it, but if you say you believe in Jesus, but then act as though you're not at all modeling his character, if you say you believe in Jesus, but your actions and attitude and your words and what you write on social media and how you act out in the world in person is more like Satan, then that little sliver of, oh yeah, I believe in Jesus, the words, they don't mean much. They don't really mean anything if our actions and our love doesn't reflect it. And that's challenging to think about. But what's amazing, at least in my own mind, as I've wrestled with this dilemma of faith versus works, is that faith in Jesus, obeying Jesus' command to love other people, it's a broad command, you could say. It's not specific. It's very open-ended. Jesus does describe a little bit about the extent of the love by drawing our attention to that it should be willing to lay down our life for our friends. That is one of the most extreme and powerful demonstrations or examples of love. But in our own lives, when we love one another, we should be willing to lay down our selfishness, our ego, you could say, in favor of benefiting them. And the reason why this faith versus works like tension is even present is because faith, for it to mean something, it has to be visible. But in order for it to be visible, it has to have works, you could say. But the works that Jesus challenges us with is open-ended. It's not that we have to die or that we have to do this thing or that thing or the next thing, a specific list that we can check off and then say, yes, we're done. That's not the way Jesus modeled love for us. But instead, Jesus moved through life, moved through his ministry, moved straight towards death. Jesus knew he was headed to Jerusalem to face death before the disciples even realized what that even meant. And Jesus challenges his followers to follow in his footsteps. Not necessarily some followers might follow his footsteps straight into death, as many of his disciples did, and many of the more famous Christians throughout history have followed in Jesus' footsteps in that way. But for the rest of us, let's keep Jesus' command visible in our lives. Let's love one another, loving our friends, loving those who even hurt us, turning the other cheek, and demonstrate in today's world what Jesus would be like if he lived today. Because in the Gospels, we get an amazing picture of Jesus. And that's something that I believe he calls each of his followers to model in the world today. And specifically, modeling Jesus's love. And so that's what I wanted to share with us. It's a little bit more challenging of a passage. It's a little bit open-ended. It might be a little bit uneasy, but I believe that it's probably, as a Christian, our highest calling. And so with all of the craziness happening in the world today, with the shutdown and slowly coming back, and all of the rioting and all of the craziness, is just people are just have a lot of pent-up anger and angst and anxiety and tension and just all of that. Let's model Jesus's love. Even if it means that we lay down our lives for our friends. And so thank you for tuning in, whether you're tuning in at Twitter or Periscope at Bible Study Cam, whether you're at Facebook, whether you're at YouTube, whether you're at the online preacher, whether you're there or somewhere else, whether you're watching this live or on replay, thank you for tuning in. And let's together keep our hearts and our minds and our eyes and our perspectives focused on Jesus, on eternity, and on moving towards Jesus' return, and each step of the way moving towards Jesus' return, modeling Jesus' love. And so thank you for tuning in. And if I've shared something that's challenged you or you want to respond to, jump into any one of the comment boxes, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube. I know Periscope's comment stream will end as soon as this live stream ends. And just let me know what you think. Let me know what I missed or what you wished I could have added, or just how this message impacted you. And if this message has challenged or inspired you and you know of somebody else who would be encouraged by it, then let me encourage you to share this video with them. Because, well, we're separated physically through distance and social distancing and all of the pandemic stuff. And while we might be separated because of violence and just all of the situations surrounding that, let's stay connected digitally and keep our focus on Jesus. So thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you tomorrow.